As much as I love Genshin, Hoyo needs to do something about 4 stars. Many people think of 4-star characters as free-to-play friendly, and for a long time it was common to assume everyone would have several important ones at high constellation, but over time it's become more and more obvious that they're anything but. The way it's all set up is horrible for all types of players. People who just started have an uphill battle to get those key staples who are essential to so many teams, long-term players with a limited budget struggle to get specific 4 stars they really want, and even whales can have a tough time if they want to get to higher cons. Clearly, Hoyo must think the current setup is a net positive for them. I'm pretty sure they're wrong. This has been one of my main complaints about Genshin for years, and once again it's reared its head with the release of Natlan. The character I was most excited for in 5.0 was Kachina. I'm a sucker for the little cute chippy babies. And since she's a 4-star, I had a bad feeling that it wasn't going to go well for me. Unfortunately, my worries were well founded. We got 1 copy of her for free, but I was really hoping to get constellations, of course. I spent over 100 wishes on Molani's banner, and the star turned gold twice before Kachina showed up. I started off close to soft pity and lost to Jean, and eventually got Molani 82 wishes after that, but still had no twirly whirly. Frustrated, I did an extra temple after the 2nd gold and finally got a Kachina. I had both of the other 4 stars at C6 already, so to only get C1 was incredibly frustrating, and made that first day in Natlan kick off on a really sour note. This is not the first time this has happened to me. What's going on here? How does it affect different types of players? Why are Hoyo doing this to us, and how could they make it better for everyone? One thing that people sometimes struggle to really get is that 4 stars are harder to get than 5 stars. Most importantly, there's no guarantee that you'll ever get the one that you want. You could spend 100,000 wishes on one banner and never get that lucky pull. Yes, that's statistically unlikely, but it's not impossible. But even if you have average luck, the odds aren't as simple as they seem at first glance. You'll often see people looking at the 4-star wishing rules and saying that there's a 1 in 6 chance of getting a specific 4-star. After all, there's a 50% chance of getting a featured 4-star and an equal chance of each of the 3 if you do win that 50-50. Half of a third is a 6th. Simples, right? It's actually more complicated than that. If you lose that 50-50, you're guaranteed to get a rate-up character in the next temple, which changes the odds completely. This guarantee increases the chances of getting your desired 4-star, but the layers of conditions and odds adjusting based on previous outcomes makes it surprisingly difficult to apply maths to get a clear sense of the overall probability. Instead, people have generally found the best way to understand it is to run wishing simulations. The simulations reach conclusions which match my intuition. You have a roughly 50% chance of getting your desired 4-star in 30 pulls, around 80% chance in the first 50 pulls, 90% chance by the time you reach soft pity for your 5-star. Roughly speaking then, you'll get 1 or 2 copies of each 4-star per 5-star. That's a lot more wishes to get to that point than many think. And, of course, there's no guarantee. For collectors and whales, this is usually just an annoyance. They'll often want to get a new 4-star to C6 to complete their collection, so it's just a question of how much they'll have to spend to get there. For dolphins, it means that those higher cons can be unattainable, and it can be devastating to drop all your savings on a banner in the hopes of getting what you want and end up with nothing to show for it. And for free-to-play players, it makes it so much harder to plan ahead, and many people end up with an awkward and lopsided roster of characters just due to bad luck. This feels even worse when you end up getting lots of copies of the wrong 4-star. Back in version 2.8, 2 of my favorite 5-stars were due to be available at the same time, Kazuha and Klee. I had neither and saved up tons of wishes so that I could get them both, and even planned to go for one of Kazuha's constellations. Those banners also saw the debut of a new 4-star, Heizo. I had C6 for both Ningguang and Thoma, but I had hundreds of wishes to spend, so surely I'd get to pretty high constellations for Heizo, right? I ended up dropping 300 wishes on those banners. I got 2 copies of Heizo. And I got 17 Ningguangs. She's currently something ridiculous like C43, and I hate it. This is one of those quirks of statistics which really grates against basic human psychology. It feels personal. It made me hate Ningguang for a long while. When this happens to you, it feels incredibly unfair, and it's hard to describe just how demoralizing it is. When it happens to you multiple times, it's even worse. I've known people to give up playing Genshin entirely after this happened to them too often. It's one of the few things which has pushed me in that direction myself, and it's made me consider stopping spending even the little that I currently do. In my opinion, Hoyo is playing with fire by keeping this system as is. Another nuance to this which piles on the frustration is when you really want a specific 4-star character, but you do not want the 5-star whose banner they're on. In the early days of Genshin, this wasn't too big a problem. During version 1, on average, each 4-star character reran once every 2 patches. If you had to skip one, you would not have to wait too long before you had another chance to get them. Over time, the number of 4-stars steadily increased, slowly lengthening the time it takes for a character to rerun. In version 4, on average, each character had only 1.5 banners across the entire version. The wait between banners is now over twice as long. That number doesn't even change all that much if you exclude the characters who released in the latter half of version 4. And it's even worse than that sounds. Certain characters, such as Bennett and Xiangling, tend to run much more often than others, further diluting the chances of the others getting a rerun. For most people, this means you have 2 choices: risk getting a 5-star you don't want, or skipping the 4-star you do want. At different times, I've done both. For example, Faruzan released in version 3.3 on banners featuring Wanderer and Ito. I really wanted Faruzan to help boost my Zhao, but I couldn't afford to waste my primos on a Wanderer I didn't want or an Ito I just didn't need. I skipped the banner entirely, and for the best part of a year, I made do with a C0 Faruzan from the Academia event before I eventually got her cons from Shen Yun's banner. On the other hand, I really wanted Kaveh when he released in version 3.6. I had enough saved up to go for it, but I already had Ganyu and I did not want Baizu at all. I pulled on Baizu's side anyway in the hope that I'd get lucky, and I did get lucky, but not in the way I wanted. I spent 100 pulls, and in that time, I got more than one copy of Baizu before finally getting a single Kaveh. Fortunately, Baizu turned out to be an absolute gem of a character, but I was a bit upset at the time for having spent 100 wishes on a 4-star. For fully free-to-play players especially, this can be an absolute nightmare, since you really are damned if you do, damned if you don't, unless you just happen to get really lucky. And to make that even worse, it's pretty obvious that Hoyo adjusts the rerun rates for characters so that the ones which people are likely to want the most are the least common, as a nudge to get people to pull more, especially on banners where the 5-stars are less enticing. One part of this is those early characters like Xiangling and Bennett who seem to be on every other banner, but for those, at least there's a good excuse. They are incredibly powerful and have valuable constellations, so for the sake of newer players, it's a good thing that they're not completely forgotten. They are available in Paimon's bargains though, so that point is a little questionable in my opinion, and it's annoying for those of us who've got them C6 many times over. But on the other side of it, certain 4-stars who are powerful in their own right tend to run less often. Faruzan is a good example of this, but the one that really bugs me right now is Chevreuse. So far, she's been on only one banner in version 4.3 with Raiden and Yoimiya. I had both of those 5-stars already, so I did a couple of risky temples on the banner and managed to get a single copy of Chevy. But so much of her strength is locked behind her C6, so I'm one of the many who really hoped she would rerun soon. Instead, we're now in 5.0 with her nowhere to be seen. I suspect she'll be on the upcoming banner with Raiden and Kinich in the second half of this patch, which puts me in that same position again. I don't really want Kinich, and I definitely don't want more Raiden cons. This also happened with Kaveh, and it's wild to look at the banner statistics and see that after his debut, 6 4-stars reran 3 times each before he came back around. His kit itself was a disappointment, but his absence from the banners was just bizarre. And it's worth mentioning that this behavior of holding back the most valuable 4-stars is significantly worse on the weapon banner. For example, Xiphos Moonlight is fantastic but incredibly rare. Not only is it supremely difficult to get a single copy of it for all the reasons we discussed so far, but it's yet another which Hoyo rarely puts on the banners. Instead, the weapon banners get an endless rotation of the basic weapons which have been available since the start of the game, which makes the banners even less worthwhile. If they had some good stuff there, I for one would be much more inclined to drop some primos every now and then. So, in summary, through mediocre odds and a lack of guarantee, exacerbated by Hoyo's insistence of running the same 4-stars over and over again, players regularly have a horrible time when they want to pull for someone specific. Outside of the featured character banners, there are a couple of other ways to get characters, but none of them does enough to combat this problem. The most valuable is Paimon's bargains, where you can spend star glitter to buy a copy of one of the 12 characters available in a 6-month rotation. However, the available lineup here has remained unchanged since day one. It remains a great way for new players to get some of those essential 4 stars, but it becomes completely useless for everyone eventually. 4 stars are also available on the standard banner, but the odds there are very low and decrease over time as they add more. Roughly half of the 4 stars you get on that banner will be characters, and the odds for which character you get are equal across all of the available ones. Coupled with the paltry number of standard wishes we get, this makes zero difference to people who want a specific character. And finally, there are free characters available either permanently or from one-time limited events. These are a nice bonus and are always appreciated, especially the permanent ones. Their value does depend a lot on how viable the character is at C0 though. So why is it set up this way, and why do I think it misses the mark? Since capitalism is how the world works, Hoyo's intent is, of course, to optimize their revenue. They'll have entire teams of people whose job is to analyze player behavior and apply game theory in order to extract as much money from people as they possibly can. 4 stars are clearly an important lever for this. They can use them to increase or decrease how enticing a banner is, making up for underwhelming characters. They avoid revealing which ones will be available until very close to the banner, triggering speculation, conversations, anticipation, and FOMO. They keep rerun frequencies inconsistent and make sure to hold back some popular characters for far longer than others to build up a scarcity mindset and ensure people rush to get the ones they want, since who knows when they'll next be available. But I think they've optimized all of this for a different audience to the one they ended up creating. Genshin's success was unprecedented, and the game has a far wider player base than anyone expected. The average Genshin player is likely to be far more casual than for many other similar games, and less forgiving of how gacha systems generally work. And yet, the banner system was designed before they had any inkling that the audience might be unusual in that sense. For a lot of the player base who were sucked into Genshin despite having never had any interest in gachas before, the setup for 4-star characters is a rough edge which turns them away. It makes people less motivated to spend and more inclined to just all out quit. I'm pretty sure many would spend more if this was more forgiving. And there are lots of ways they could fix this. They don't even need to change things completely, just a small tweak or two would make a world of difference, especially when you consider how much goodwill any improvements would bring. One approach I've never seen discussed is to reduce the odds of getting characters after their C6. Currently, when the gacha system decides you're getting a character, each character has equal odds out of all the ones available. Imagine if, instead, the odds of getting any specific character would decrease if they're C6. Even better if they further decrease every time you get them after that point, since then at least there'd be a better constellation prize than a measly single pull. While this might sound too good to be true, Hoyo could tune the strength of the adjustment to ensure that it wouldn't hurt their bottom line. Even a small change here would make it feel so much better. The more popular solution, and one which would work brilliantly in combination with the odds adjustment idea, is to add a fate system for 4 stars. This would be a straight copy of the system designed for the weapon banner. Before wishing, you'd pick which of the 4 stars you want to aim for. Every time you get a different 4 star, you get a fate point, until eventually you get enough points to guarantee that you'll get the one you want. This idea really does feel like something Hoyo might consider, and it would negate the biggest of the problems with the current system, since you'd finally be able to guarantee you'll get a character. One reason I don't hate Genshin's gacha system is that you know the worst case cost to get a 5-star, and the gambling aspect is limited to whether you'll get them earlier than that. A 4-star fate system would finally make that possible for 4 stars. Neither of those touch on some of the other issues though, such as rerun frequency and the heavy reliance on FOMO in how the banners work. To combat those, at the very least I'd want Hoyo to finally expand the Paimon's bargain shop. Adding new characters to this would make Star Glitter more valuable and mitigate the risks when wishing for a 4-star. In an ideal world, they'd add them to the regular rotation, maybe a year after their initial debut for example, though a more limited option would be to make each 4-star purchasable on their birthday. There are also more complicated ways to fix the rerun frequency, for example by adding 4-star specific banners or allowing us to select 3 characters out of a pool of 4 stars to customize the rate-up slots on the character banner, though I feel like these are much less likely to become a reality. The Chronicled Wish banner seemed like an attempt at addressing this, but it introduced just as many problems as it solved, and we've heard nothing of it since it first happened, so I wouldn't hold my breath. Nightlang came with a ton of different things which people would never have expected to see in Genshin. People were ecstatic, and many who had dropped the game in the past have actually come back once more. The 4-star problem is still a sore point for many, and these kinds of tweaks would reduce the frustration and encourage people to play long term. Reduced churn is highly valuable, especially in the crowded gacha market of today, and player happiness would doubtless increase. And many people, myself included, who would never ever spend to get a 4-star with the current setup might actually consider it if there was some kind of a guarantee. There are many ways Hoyo could fix this, and if they did, people would be even more excited. And I'm pretty sure Genshin's income would go up, not down. I guess we'll just have to hope they're considering it. Until next time!